Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers, thought and thinkers. This is LL3's newest podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy mangroves of South Florida. And today's date, Tuesday, February 16th, 2016. Yeah, so it looks like everyone had a nice little long weekend, Valentine's Day, President's Day, and so forth. And, people just going back to school, some people going back to work. Everyone's working on that President's Day, including myself, which is no big deal. This is how the business world goes. However, I'm just gonna keep this thing pretty brief, like the last one. There's a couple topics and interesting little things, nothing really too bunctuous or exploitating by any means. So I'm just gonna start off, which I just checked on the Washington Times, came out today. As this reads, John Brennan, CIA chief, says U.S. knew of ISIS plot before Paris attacks. Oh, really? Can we say Operation Gladio? Oh, yeah. Let's just check what this have to say here. And it says here, the head of the CIA says American spies knew the Islamic State terror group was planning an attack days before militants slaughtered 130 people in Paris last year. CIA Director John Brennan told CBS 60 Minutes that the system was blinking red shortly before the terrorists launched a string of gun and bomb attacks in the French capital on November 13th. That's Friday, November 13th to be exact. He said the CIA was aware of the impending attacks but was unable to intercept messages the terrorists were using to plot the massacre because of the new cell phone encryption technology. Oh, so this is going to be, so check that out, new encryption technology. So the whole thing is, they're targeting on encryption. That's the new terrorist rhetoric, okay? So it's nothing new whatsoever. And I'll continue on. We knew the system was blinking red. We knew just days before ISIL was trying to carry out something, Mr. Brennan said, using the acronym for Islamic State, Daily Mail reported. But the individuals involved have been able to take advantage of the newly available communication that were walled off from law enforcement officials, he added. A total of 130 people were killed in the Paris attacks, the worst terrorist attacks in Europe since the Madrid bombings in 2004. He said the CIA has stopped numerous attacks, said he expects Islamic State militants will try to carry out such attacks in the U.S., but doubted their success. I'm expecting them to try to put the place in the operatives, the material, or whatever else they need to do, or to incite people to carry out these attacks clearly, Mr. Brennan said, so I believe that their attempts are inviolable. I don't think their success necessarily are. He said that if the Islamic State operatives did manage to strike in the U.S., then it would encourage us to be more forceful. So they want to use the encryption, okay, as an excuse for the attacks that happened on Paris, France. Same old thing. We got to sacrifice our privacy for tyranny. It sounds pretty obvious, right? Allah, September 11, 2001, and everything else has been going on. Like, they attacked us because we have our freedom. So that's why they use the technology of encryption. So they want to use this pro Big Brother presentation that encryption is cancerous. It can be, whoever uses encryption can be a terrorist. Okay, this is how they're trying to drill it on our heads that we have to keep everything open and free. We can't keep things private because he says they know best. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Brennan, but with all due respect and in good faith, I know for a fact, in my heart and soul, without a doubt, that what happened in Paris, France, 130 innocent good people were killed on that time, was definitely sponsored by the New World Order, and you know that for a fact. So stop conning the con man, or men and women around this country and the world. The truth of the matter is a lot bigger than what it is. Plus, like I said before on the Strong Seas Network and NWO Lambert in my past episode, you can look it up. The upcoming Strong City Summit will be held in Paris, France in April. Could we say coincidence? And of course, France is an anti-self-defense nation. One of the toughest firearm laws in Europe, possibly the world. Don't give me this con man talk. You had the knowledge, but we all know one thing. ISIS is not funded by Muslims, but folks from the New World Order, etc. So stop playing your little petty games, because right now you are losing the information war and you know it. And anyone from the CIA probably say, "Oh yeah, you are an instigator." Look the third. Well, I'm just sorry because I've been following your guys' patterns for a good long time. I'm not saying I'm an expert. I don't know everything, but now things are getting too obvious. So this is how I see it, and I know many people out there will do agree with me in good faith. Some may disagree, but I always tell everyone this: examine the information responsibly, or otherwise observe responsibly. And this is a total sham. What Brennan said, and the people in the United States and the world should not buy his garbage by any means necessary. And that's all I have to say about this man, because I'll be digressing all day long. Oh, next one here from the Truth Media. Rachel Blevins talks about the lack of autopsy in Scalia death raises questions. The circumstances surrounding the death of Senior Associate Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia led some detectives to question why his body was not autopsied. After he was found Saturday morning in the Kilbolo Creek Ranch in West Texas, Scalia's body was transported to El Paso by the Texas Department of Public Safety and U.S. Marshals. Scalia's remains arrived at the Sunset Funeral Home around 3:30 a.m. Sunday, where he was embalmed, which is required by Texas law before it can be moved to another state. The Washington Post reported that a manager at the El Paso Funeral Home where Scalia's body was taken said that his family made it clear that they did not want an autopsy. Okay? In a frantic search for a justice of peace, Presidio County Judge Cinderella Guevara pronounced Scalia's dead by natural causes without seeing his body or by ordering an autopsy, and based off of the details that she was given by law enforcement over the phone. However, Juanita Bishop, a justice of peace in Presidio, who was contacted but could not get to Scalia's body, told Washington Post she would have made a different decision concerning Scalia's body because she would want to know. Billy Ritchie, retired deputy chief and former head of criminal investigations for the D.C. police, told the New York Post that he was shocked to learn that no autopsy would be performed. How do you know that the person wasn't smothered? How do you know it's not a homicide until you conduct an investigation? Ritchie questioned. You have to do your job. Once you go through that process, you can conclude that it is a naturally occurring death. John Poindexter, the owner of the Cibolo Creek Ranch, claimed that Scalia was found in a bed and a pillow over his head. His bedclothes were unwrinkled. Poindexter described Scalia as lying was very restfully, said he looked like he had not quite waken up from a nap. Retired Brooklyn homicide detective Patricia Tufo told the New York Post that he also questioned the lack of autopsy when a pillow was found over the head of the Supreme Court Justice. He's not at home. There are no witnesses to his death, and there was no reported explanation for why there was a pillow over his head, Tufu said. So I think under circumstances it's not unreasonable to request an autopsy, despite the fact that he has pre-existing ailments and the fact that he's almost 80 years old. You want to be sure that there's not something other than natural causes. As a staunch conservative voice of the Supreme Court, Scalia's death could affect the outcome of upcoming cases. Last week, Scalia voted to put a hold on President Obama's Clean Power Plan, which was presented as a regulation to help lower carbon emissions from the U.S. power plants. Voter noted that without Scalia's vote, conservative members of the court no longer have a majority, at least in the short term, and the sudden shift gave them a boost to the supporters of the emission rules. Very interesting. And it's funny because I haven't really talked about his death and so forth. But I had some people real critical of him. Always look at the pros and cons, and some people, oh well, yeah, what are the pros things about it? You have to look at his history at first to make that decision. And I may not agree with some of his decision making, which is okay. But other times he's spot on. Okay, so the whole thing is this. You have to look at his whole history first before jumping to his conclusion. And you can be critical in some of his statements, which is okay. It's called free speech. You can call him out on it. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't. I know one thing. Some people called him out on it, and he don't get offended, but he honored it, which is fine because that's how he was. I have to question his death because he hasn't have an autopsy. Okay, very strange, my friends. Very unusual. Because if they just say he didn't have an autopsy, And others said, wait a minute, didn't make any sense. I think in good faith it should have been a autopsy report. Make sure he's not have been murdered, because now these are questions for basically having a pillow over his head. Nah, that sounds irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. So you have to always look at the bigger picture, a lot bigger than what it is. And I have a feeling this can be another conspiracy theory, which everyone, oh, you're a bunch of conspiracy theorists. But you know what? A lot of it has become fact. And the truth of the matter is, they run the other ways. When those people use that conspiracy theory, conspiracy nuts, they're like cockroaches. You put a big flash, a big light over them, they scatter everywhere. So this is how you have to look at this, and and I'm pretty observant in these areas. I'm not an expert by any means, but I will take the time. But based on this report, it doesn't add up of natural causes. And I'm expecting more will be coming out about his death. People will be questioning about it. It will be out by for a good long time. But you always got to think about this, my friends. If Scalia hasn't been bought and paid for, he can be a target. It's possible. You have to make those decisions on your own, including myself. So next one here came from govexecutive.com, which is came out the 12th to be exact. It says here, Neverending War on Federal Whistleblowers. As a read, federal employers are often the only people in the position of identifying legal contact, which defines gross mismanagement or other misconduct at federal agencies. Even though law had theoretically protected whistleblowers for 4 decades since the enactment of the 1978 Civil Service Reform Act, Congress and the executive branch have waged a never-ending war in an attempt to punish whistleblowers. Instead of addressing the underlying misconduct, Congress should avoid enacting legislation that could resurrect the spoils system. After all, if it was a spoils system that led to the creation of a merit-based civil service in 1883, basic due process protections for civil service employees may seem burdensome, but a politicized federal workforce would be a disaster. Initially, it was the executive branch that eviscerate protections for whistleblowers because the no administration likes to see its faults pointed out. The government successfully argued to the Merit System Protection Board, which is presidentially appointed, that an agency was free to fire a whistleblower as long as the agency could claim that it made the decision for some unrelated reason. Even though the supervisor was openly hostile to the whistleblower's disclosures of government misconduct, Congress responded in the 1989 Whistleblower Protection Act, which singled out for criticism of the Special Office of Special Counsel, the MSPB, and the courts of erecting barriers to disclosures, which will limit the necessary flow of information from employees who have knowledge of government wrongdoing. Despite enhanced legislative protections, the executive branch continued to successfully argue to the MSPB and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the federal court that whistleblowers were not protected if they made disclosures to the wrongdoer, or if the agency already knew about the misconduct. In response, Congress passed the 2012 Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act, which overruled prior MSPB and the Federal Circuit Court rulings and emphasized that any protected disclosures of illegal activities, gross waste of public funds, or gross mismanagement will be protected. In recent years, agencies and inspector general, who in theory are supposed to protect whistleblowers and investigate government misconduct, have been shifting their attention to investigate whistleblowers. At the behest of supervisors who are upset with their disclosures, we are seeing IGs go after whistleblowers, sometimes resulting in criminal investigations by the Justice Department or even referrals to the professional licensing boards. Pretty interesting here. More recently, Congress, this time under Republican control, has joined the executive branch's war on federal employees by proposing legislation that will severely curtail the due process and other civil service rights of federal employees. These bills in the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform would directly harm whistleblowers by making it much easier for agencies to demote or terminate them, and much harder for whistleblowers to challenge adverse personnel action. Can we talk about corporatize everything, huh? Congress has already eviscerated civil service protections for members of the senior executive service in the Veteran Affairs Department by making it much easier for the agency to demote or fire them, and by limiting judicial review to a single administrative judge of the MSPB, which then 1 month allow for appeals, even in SES members claim that the agency fired her because she reported misconduct. The board and the Federal Circuit no longer have any role in protecting SES member at VA. Thus, VA can get rid of SES members who the agency does not like, including those who are whistleblowers. Can we say? Can Wow, wow, wow. Can we say, the Walmart way, right? So far, VA has demoted or terminated 4 SES members. One of them, employed at the Phoenix VA hospital, long lost before an administrative judge, is now appealing to the federal court, arguing that the lack of judicial review is unconstitutional. In the past 2 weeks, administrative judges of the MSPB overturned adverse actions, 2 demotions, and one removal against 3 other SES members. The motions were reversed on the basis that VA failed to discipline other SES members who were involved with alleged performance misconduct and properly targeted only those 2 SES members. The basis for overturning the removal of the third SES member has not yet been disclosed. Now, Congress wants to extend the SES removals process across the entire government through the Senior Executive Service Accountability, which is H.R. 4358, approved by the House Committee on Government Oversight and Reform. That would make it much easier for agencies to get rid of SES members who are disfavored for the wrong reasons, and make it much harder for SES members to challenge their removal, unless they can get an administrative judge to agree that the agency discipline was improper. Essentially, SES positions will become at-will employment, subject to political whims. Meanwhile, the executive branch, through the Office of Personnel Management, is trying to set quotas for the agencies to ensure that SES members are regularly rotated to their positions, including at other agencies, which will make it easier to get rid of SES members. The Committee on Government Oversight and Reform also approved on a party line vote H.R. 3023, which would extend the probationary period for all federal employees from 1 to 2 years. Even more problematically, the probationary period would not even start until the new hire completed all the requiring training, which could take months or years. This will allow agencies to take adverse actions against probationary or pre-probationary employees who have reduced civil service protections, another way to ensure that there is no whistleblower protection for new hires for years. Congress has already done this for the Defense Department through the fiscal 2016 National Defense Authorization Act, and is now trying to institute this evisceration of protections across entire federal government. The House Committee has also approved the Official Personnel File Enhancement Act, H.R. 4360, which would prevent employees from getting a clean record by resigning or retiring while an investigation is underway. Instead, any finding by an investigator will be added to their permanent personnel record, which will be an indelible black mark affecting security clearances and the ability to be hired by other agencies. Again, because whistleblowers are the subjects of most retaliatory investigations, this legislation will provide another way to go after them. Senator Charles Grassley, Republican from Iowa, has waged a spirited but lonely battle against his both congressional colleagues in the executive branch in his decade-long effort to protect whistleblowers. He recently proposed the FBI Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act, Senate Bill 2390. That bill will provide for an outside review of FBI whistleblower claims by administrative law judges instead of a review limited to within the agency. Grassley also introduced the Administrative Leave Act of 2016, which is Senate Bill 2450. In response to the acts, many agencies have put employees under investigation on paid leave for weeks, months, or even years. This legislation would prevent agencies from keeping employees on indefinite leave, would require agencies to consider allowing telework instead of leave, and would allow employees to challenge being placed on leave as a prohibited personnel practice. The Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee recently approved the bill, but the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee introduced competing legislation, Administrative Leave Reform Act, which is H.R. 4359, which would limit paid leave for alleged misconduct to poor performance to 14 days in a year, but would provide no protection to employees. In other words, under the House legislation, the government could presumably convert the employee to unpaid leave after 14 days for as long as the investigation is underway. In the history of retaliation against whistleblowers, it doesn't matter which political party is in power and at any particular time, except when they are supported by a few brave supervisors and members of Congress. Whistleblowers are still risking their careers if they try to report and fix problems at the agency, acting to protect the public interest in honest and effective government. So this is done by Lynn Burnaby and Alex R. Colbert, which are partners of Burnaby and Colbert PLLC, which is a firm in Washington, D.C. Yes, so the whole thing is, you work for the federal government, you're a whistleblower. They don't want that. They want you to be a butt boy, a house peasant, and a field peasant. They want you to go bend. If they say bend over, they want you to go how far, please. They want you to go yes, boss. Even though a lot of conditions are garbage and it's corruption. Yeah, everything's great, boss. That's how they want. That's how the federal government want the federal government employees to do. Be a bunch of bend over bobs and Barbies. And I say that with plurality. Okay. So this is why I am not too keen when you have too much federal government trying to run our lives. Because even if they can do what they want, but if employees try to question it, they try to put them in the corner wearing a dunce hat. It's nothing new whatsoever. It's been happening everywhere. This is just a prime example why we need to downsize the federal government, because they got too much overreach, too much power. It is a real sham, too. I support protecting whistleblowers by all means, as long as it's done with merit. And I know a lot of them have merit and they're being punished for doing what's right. And this is why I tell people this, that this is nothing more than a deception. When the federal government thinks they're smarter than their employees, they'll just tell them to shut up. This house is going to be done, and you're doing this for your own good. When someone in the authority figures tell you that, they're lying to your teeth, including those bastards in Washington, D.C., okay? And, okay, well, I'm going to do one more here. The next one here, this came out from LouRockwell.com. This is by Lawrence M. Vance. It goes, something else Republicans don't get. And it says here, ENDA is dead, but the Equality Act yet lives. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act first introduced in the 103rd Congress in 1994, and every Congress since then, except the 109th and current 114th, would have forbidden an employer with 15 more employees. 1, to fail to refuse to hire or discharge any individual or otherwise discriminate against any individual with respect to the compensation, terms, conditions, or privileges of employment of individuals because such individuals' actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity, or 2, to limit, segregate, classify the employers for applicants for employment of the employer in any way that would deprive or tend to deprive any individual of employment or otherwise adversely affect the status of the individual as an employee, because such individual's actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. The gender identity provisions was added beginning in 2009. The bill generally died in committee, but most recently, December 2013, passed by the Senate by the vote 64 to 32, only to die in the House. It is in place of the most erroneous Equality Act was introduced on July 23, 2015, in both the House and Congress. In the House, H.R. 3185 has 172 co-sponsors, only one of them a Republican. In the Senate, Senate Bill 1858 has 40 co-sponsors, only one of them a Republican. The Equality Act is a bill to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation, and for other purposes. It would amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to include sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity among the prohibited categories of discrimination or segregation in places of public accommodation. It would also expand the category of public accommodations to include places or establishments that provide 1. Exhibition, recreation, exercise, amusement, gatherings, or displays. 2. Goods, services, or programs, including a store, a shopping center, an online trailer or service provider, a salon, a bank, a gas station, a food bank, a service or care center, a shelter, a travel agency, a funeral parlor, or healthcare, accounting for or legal service, or transportation services. Establishment is prohibited from being construed to be limited to the physical facility or a place. The legislation authorizes the Department of Justice to bring civil action, and if it receives a complaint from the individual who claims to be denied equal utilization of a public facility owned, operated, or managed by a state other than the public schools or colleges on account of sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity, or denied admission or not permitted to continue attending a public college by reason of sexual orientation or gender identity, thereby expanding DOJ's existing authority to bring such actions for complaints on a basis of race, color, religion, sex, or sexual or national origin. The Equality Act also revises public schools desegregation standards to provide for the assignment of students without regard to sexual orientation or gender identity, prohibits programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance or from denying benefits or discriminating against persons based on sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity, prohibits employers with 15 or more employees from discriminating based on sexual orientation or gender identity, subject to the same exceptions and conditions that currently apply to unlawful employment practices based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, requires employers to recognize individuals in accordance with their with their gender identity if a sex is a bona fide occupational qualification, and that is a reasonably necessary to the normal operation of that particular business or enterprise. Provides government employees with protections against discrimination on basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. Authorizes DOJ to intervene in equal protection actions in federal court on account of sexual orientation or gender identity. Requires protection against discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin. Includes protections against discrimination based on 1, association with a person who is a member of such protected class, or 2, a perception or belief, even if inaccurate, that an individual is a member of such a protected class. Prohibits the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993 from providing a claim, defense, or basis of challenging such protections. It prohibits an individual from being access denied to shared facilities, including a restroom, a locker room, and a dressing room. This is in accordance with the individual's gender identity. Amends the Fair Housing Act and Equal Credit Opportunity Act and jury selection standards to add sexual orientation and gender identity as classes protected against discrimination under such laws. Major corporations like Apple, General Mills, Facebook, Nike, and American Airlines have expressed support for the legislation. This follows the signing by over 100 prominent leaders in the tech industry, joint statements from the tech industry leaders calling the legislation to add sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes to their civil rights laws, and to explicitly forbid discrimination of or denial of services to anyone. Late last year, Obama administration adjusted the legislation after reviewing the bill for several weeks, said the White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest. Upon that review, it is now clear that the administration strongly supports the Equality Act. The president's endorsement came on the same day that he became the first sitting U.S. president featured on the cover of LGBT publication. Naturally, all current and former Democratic presidential nominee aspirants have expressed their support for the Equality Act, with the exception of Robert Dole and Mike Kirk, both moderates from Illinois and a lone Republican in the House and the Senate, who are co-sponsoring their chambers' respective bills. Republicans in and out of Congress are balking at the legislation, but not because they have a philosophical objection to federal anti-discrimination legislation or because any commitment to the principles of individual liberty, free association, free assembly, voluntary interaction, and private property. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, an unconstitutional expansion of federal power that destroyed the rights of private property, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, free enterprise, and freedom of contract, currently prohibits discrimination in public accommodations based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And the Fair Housing Act of 1968 adds this discrimination based on disability and familial status. Republicans have been accepting all these things at least 40 years, even when Republicans control the White House and both houses of Congress for over 4 years of Bush's presidency. There was never any attempt to change to the federal anti-discrimination law or abolish the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC. Republicans have no problem with government attempts to prevent individuals and businesses from discriminating against certain groups in the course of renting hotel rooms, serving food, leasing apartments, selling houses, hiring employees, admitting to clubs and organizations, or engaging in commerce. The main objection Republicans have to the Equality Act is how it will adversely affect religious liberty. Here is Andrew Walker, Director of Public Policy Studies for the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention. He says here the Equality Act represents the most invasive threat to religious liberty ever proposed. Were it to pass and sweeping effects on religious liberty, free speech, and freedom of conscience will be historic. Aside from enumerated protections that give rise to conflict between sexual identity and religious freedom, by elevating sexual orientation and gender identity to the level of race, the law's effect would functionally equate those who don't agree with it with racists and labeled them perpetrators of irrational bigotry. Indeed, to favor the Equality Act is to oppose and actively stigmatize the moral convictions that millions of Americans adhere to with abiding sincerity, and a deep religious precedent. All public accommodations in the programs would be prohibited from denying any good or service to persons on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. This sounds acceptable in theory, but it leaves no room for accommodating the viewpoints of those whose service, speech, or creativity are used to serve wedding ceremonies. Consider the cases of florists, photographers, and bankers who have had no problem serving gay customers for years, but have objected to providing their services for gay weddings. The Equality Act leaves these individuals defenseless by failing to accommodate their sincere religious beliefs and by failing to distinguish between dignity of gay individuals and the particular conduct, such as wedding ceremonies, in which some cannot in good conscience participate. What he say is, of course, absolutely true, as this is. The bill's stated intentions and its actual consequences are very different. While the bill purports to protect individuals from discrimination, the Equality Act will discriminate against those who do not agree with the regime laws premised on sexually permissive and understanding human nature that denies sexual complementarity. It would thus create a new form of discrimination by socially isolate certain beliefs. With what this all comes down to is that Republicans and most conservatives believe discrimination is perfectly okay if it concerns religion. Thus, churches, synagogues, and mosques should be free to hire as ministers, rabbis, and imams for only men for leadership positions and discriminate against women. Christian, Jewish, and Muslim schools should be free to hire as teachers, just as Christians, Jews, and Muslims, and discriminate against those of other religions. Religious organizations should be free to admit only heterosexual members and discriminate against homosexual, transgenders, and gender-fluid individuals. Religious florists, photographers, and bakers should be free to refuse to provide their services for same-sex weddings. But do Republicans and conservatives really believe what they are saying? Do they actually believe that religious discrimination is okay? Not always. Consider the recent case of Kuwait Airways refusing to carry Israelis on its airplanes. After 35 years of service, Kuwait Airways recently ended its flight between New York City and London rather than have to transport Israelis between the two cities. Kuwait, like 16 other mostly Arab countries that do not recognize the state of Israel, and Kuwaiti law prohibits domestic companies from conducting business with Israeli citizens. Kuwait Airways does not allow Israelis on its non-stop flights between New York City and Kuwait City. Because Israelis are granted visas to visit Kuwait, at issue is just the flights from New York City that used to connect to London before going on to Kuwait City. After an Israeli citizen filed a complaint when his attempt to book a flight on Kuwait Airways from New York City to London was refused, the United States Department of Transportation ruled that the airline's long-standing policy of prohibiting Israelis from traveling on those flights amounted to unreasonable discrimination because Israeli passport holders have the legal right to travel from the United States to the United Kingdom. An airline does not have the right to refuse to sell tickets and to transport a person between the U.S. and any third country where they are allowed to disembark based on that law of that country, said a spokesman for DOT. I don't know a single Republican who has to come to the defense of Kuwait Airways for its practice of discrimination against Israelis. Keep in mind that Kuwaiti attitude towards Israel is ultimately a religious dispute. Republicans just don't get it on discrimination. If discrimination is bigoted, racist, sexist, xenophobia, homophobia, unjust, and just plain wrong, then it doesn't suddenly cease to be those things when discrimination is based on some religious convictions. But discrimination is not wrong. In fact, there is nothing inherently wrong with discrimination. It is not a dirty word. No one has the right to work in any job, to be served in any restaurant, shop at any store, and enter anyone's property, rent any hotel room, lease any apartment, buy a house, be admitted to any club or organization, associate with someone who doesn't want to be associated with them. Discrimination is not an aggression, even if it's based on stereotypes, prejudice, bigotry, or racism, even if it appears to be illogical, irrational, nonsensical, or unreasonable and should not be prohibited by force of law. Discrimination means freedom. All discrimination is not just religious discrimination. A free society is a society free of discrimination laws. So the whole thing with what Mr. Vance has to say is called supply and demand. So the truth of the matter is, like restaurants, bars and restaurants can refuse anyone. You can refuse anyone's service. You know what? I've been, it happened to me a few times, and I'm just a white, I'm just a Caucasian, um, bearded, ragtag looking maverick. And I know how to being deprived on going to this place, but you know what? I learned not to get angry. I just get inspired because they need me more, I need them. And the whole thing, another thing I look at too is supply and demand. You want to get these people what hurts? Get them hurt in their wallets. Don't go to these facilities. Then they could change their tune. And another thing too is like even like in the theater industry, you don't need the government. Okay, you could like when it comes when you have like a unions organized representing workers, they could add that in there called bargaining agreement, which is legit, is not in government's way by any government intervening by any means. So you can go other avenues to make sure that discrimination can be ended. We don't need Washington D.C. That's why I understand these equality laws and so forth. It may sound great, but you have to always examine the fine print. It's like everything else. But how I look at it, supply and demand, freedom of choice, and here's the thing: they need you more. You need them to all those businesses that want to discriminate. Like I said, we don't need them. They need us. Without us, they're nothing. And we don't need Washington, D.C. to legislate anything like that. Okay? And that is it, my friends. I'd like to thank everyone for listening to this episode. Plus, feel free to download and share it throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, by any means, love letters, hate letters, don't matter. Or you're going to send me information that's pretty interesting I may want to check out. Whatever you do, please use your comments with decorum. You can hit me on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, YouTube, worldtruth.tv, worldtruth.org, excuse me, or scene.life, which is SEEN.LIFE. Or you can email me at LookieLuck3, it's number 3 altogether, at gmail.com. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves, keep on spreading the love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.